friends. My name is Chris. I am making this video for my friends. We have been talking for a while about doing a British Virgin Islands catamaran trip, and I want to produce this video with the intention of giving some information to my friends who are interested in doing this with me. However, I'm also going to post this video on YouTube, so if you are interested in taking a catamaran trip to the British Virgin Islands, you may find some useful information in this video. For the moment, I am recording this in the July season of 2024. I'm going to be giving some information regarding primarily about timing of when is a good time to visit the British Virgin Islands, pros and cons. I'm going to be giving a little bit of information in terms of what to expect cost-wise. And then I'm also going to be giving a little bit of insight into what it's like to actually spend a week on a catamaran. This is intended again for the people who I've been inviting into this sort of a trip and who maybe don't have a whole lot of experience in what it's like to spend a week on a catamaran or have never done this sort of thing before. But like I said, hopefully you'll be able to glean some extra information from this as well. I'll be giving a broad overview. I want to keep the video relatively short. So this is not going to be an in-depth video. I may do some follow-up videos that would have more information and more in-depth at a later time. Myself, I have gotten certified through ASA, American Sailing Association, to be able to captain and bareboat charter sailing boats, specifically both monohull and catamaran. I have done courses ASA 101 through 114, and the primarily ones being coastal navigation and bareboat chartering are the two courses. Now, for the British Virgin Islands and for most of the Caribbean, there is no certification requirement to be able to charter a boat down there. Most of the companies that are going to be able to let you charter a boat are more interested in what your resume is, how much experience you have on boats, and they look at that more heavily than the actual certifications themselves. But that's just general information for you to know if you're interested in doing such a thing. I think it's a really good idea to have some professional experience. There's my dog over here. I'm sorry, it's backwards. That's Louie. Anyway, so I think it's really good to be able to have some background experience to before you try and go sail a boat on your own. Obviously, ASA or several other certification, RYA at Hamilton, some others that offer some great courses to do that if you're interested in that sort of lifestyle. But for our purposes, I'm going to be the captain of the boat. I'm going to be handling most of that stuff. As a crew, as passengers, I'll certainly get you involved if you want to be, or if you just want to lay around on the boat and do that, that's fine too. Okay, so let's talk about when do we want this trip to be. Now again, I'm guiding this video specifically for my friends who want to do a British Virgin Islands trip with me. And I am specifically looking at the late spring, early summer of 2025. Now, why this particular time zone? So the Caribbean, specifically the British Virgin Islands, obviously has high seasons, low seasons, and off seasons. High season predominantly being northern hemisphere, the winter months. So we're talking, Christmas through March or so, being kind of the high months, high seasons. So that's the time when the most amount of people are down in the Caribbean. That's the time when everything is the most expensive. It's the busiest, but there's also some pros to that too, because it's also the time when all the restaurants, all the businesses are going to be the most open. So in terms of like getting on like a scuba trip or a fishing trip, you'll be able to share those costs with a group as opposed to trying to charter that stuff individually. So there are some pros, but it does mean that you're going to have higher crowds and things are going to be more expensive. The downside to the off-season is the inverse of that, obviously. No crowds. You've got the beaches pretty much all to yourself, but a lot of the businesses are going to shut down in the off-season because hurricanes come through, and people don't like to be in the middle of hurricanes while they're on their vacation, right? Obviously. So the good part of that is hurricanes are very easy to see from a fair distance off. So it's not like you're going to go down to the Caribbean and all of a sudden you're going to wake up one morning and bam, hurricane's there, right? It does mean that if you want to travel in the hurricane season, you do have to be prepared to be flexible with your schedule and be prepared to readjust your vacation travel times if you want to be able to do that. Not so much good for a group dynamic, obviously. But the pros to that are obviously you can get some very good deals price point wise. Renting boats, renting hotels, and everything like that is very inexpensive. Now, if you want to do things specifically like chartering a boat for a fishing trip or going out on a scuba dive or something, you're probably going to be the only person at that point in time who's going to go out, which means you're going to have to rent that whole boat to yourself. So the price point for that is going to be pretty high. Same thing with if you want to take a ferry from island to island. Not going to be a whole lot of people doing that, at least a private ferry. There are public ferries that you can take that are very inexpensive, but their schedule may be reduced in the off season. So there's some cons there. So the midpoint, the happy point between those two is obviously go in the shoulder seasons or the mid seasons. So for British Virgin Islands, that's going to be typically from about April to about June-ish. And it's going to vary a little bit depending on the company you're talking to, what they consider their mid-season versus their off-season. But your hurricane seasons are typically July to about the end of September, maybe the early part of October. That's not like hurricanes are only going to come through at that time, but that's the highest probability point in a bell curve of when the hurricanes typically hit the Caribbean. So some companies, like I said, will just shut down completely for those months, just because they don't want to run the risk, and some will continue to run, but on reduced hours or a reduced schedule or something of that nature. So to me, for our 2025 trip, we'll be shooting for May. We could potentially go as early as April. We could potentially go as late as June, depending on what we decide. As people who are seriously interested in this, what we decide as a group we want to do together, and what everybody can work with their own personal schedules. But I'm shooting more or less for May, the midpoint of May, and then if we need to adjust that as people commit to going on this trip, we can do that. The other possibility would be looking at something post-September, which would be late October, early November. There is a bit of a price break, not as good as what you find in the late spring, early summer dip. That shoulder season, but there is a shoulder season post-hurricane season right before you hit Thanksgiving and Christmas, where you could potentially get some deals and a bit of a price point break for renting your catarams and other things. Okay, so that kind of gives us a good idea. Now, in terms of weather, the Caribbean, especially the British Virgin Islands, is very stable in terms of temperatures. You got maybe a 3 or 4 degree temperature range from spring to winter, but it's not significant. Rainfall, obviously, with the hurricane season, the rainfall does tend to go up somewhat. But again, most of the Caribbean, you're going to have rainfall coming through at midpoint, maybe a shower or something midday or early in the morning, and then it's going to blow off after about 20 or 30 minutes. That's just typical Caribbean weather patterns. Now, that's not to say you can't have a full day of rain or something, so you need to keep your schedule a little bit flexible for that, your itinerary for the week that you're down there. If you do have a rainy day, you obviously don't want to be trying to sail between islands because that's miserable for everybody. So having perhaps a flexible itinerary that allows you to maybe visit a different island or stay at a place if you do have a rainy day is a good idea. And then, of course, like I said, hurricanes can happen at any point in time, but you have plenty of notice of that happening. And any good captain is going to check their weather pretty regularly and frequently to make sure that there are not any points where that could potentially be an issue. If a hurricane did, for whatever reason, happen to blow through at a really weird time of the year, you bring the boat back to the charter, you get into a hotel, or you get on a plane and you get out of there with plenty of time to do that. So that's usually not a big concern. Okay, so we talked about when to go to the Caribbean. Let's talk now about some price points. So depending on what you want to do. Now, there are several companies that charter catamarans in the Caribbean, Moorings and Sunsail being sister companies, probably being some of the bigger companies. There's also some large ones like Navigar and Dream Yacht Charters. There's some smaller companies as well that run specifically out of the British Virgin Islands. There's probably about 4 or 5 of those. So they're going to have a little bit different price point models. I think for us, if we have 4 couples, we would probably be looking at a catamaran of size of roughly 45 feet to 50 foot. For that price point for a relatively newer catamaran, I think a good model to shoot for would be about $2,000 to $2,500 per couple. Now that's assuming, again, full capacity, which would be all 4 cabins will be booked with 2 people in it each. So that would be a total of 8 people on the boat. And that gives a pretty good range. Now, are there more expensive boats? Are there less expensive boats? Absolutely. There's some pros and cons with that. But again, I think that's a pretty good price point expectation for a sailing catamaran to shoot for something in the range of 3 to 4 years old. You could potentially find a brand new one too in that price point. And again, if you want to go smaller, you could probably get a little bit better deal. There are some companies that have more customized catamarans that offer stuff at a higher price point. And again, if you go much larger than 50 foot, there are some catamarans that are larger than 50 foot. But to go from like a 50 foot to a 60 foot boat, you may be talking like instead of $10,000 a week, you could be talking $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for a week. And then if you get over 60 feet, it just goes absolutely insane. $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 for a week. So that is not the price point that we are at or we're considering. And obviously they're going to want to make sure that if you're taking out a boat that expensive, you've got some pretty good experience. They're probably going to want you to have a skipper handle that boat for you and not to be running that on your own. So again, like I said, 45 foot to 50 foot boat is what we would be expecting to charter for the week. There are catamarans started around 38 feet in length, 39 feet in length, and they go up to, like I said, 70 feet plus. But realistically, what most people are chartering is in that 45 to 50 foot range for a group of 4. Now, if we were a group, for whatever reason, if we had, so we couldn't get all 4 couples to get together and agree to a specific date, if we had to go down to 3 couples, we might be able to get by with a little bit smaller boat, something in the 42 to 45 foot range. And then we would still more or less be at that $2,000 to $2,500 mark per couple. So again, that's why I say that's a pretty comfortable range to just expect for the boat itself. Now, some other costs would obviously be provisioning. There's conversations to have about that in terms of how you want to handle your meals, whether you want to handle them on ship and prepare your own meals, whether you want to have a crew on board who can handle doing the meals for you. There's options for that. You can hire chefs and stewardesses and hostesses to be on board the ship, as opposed to like trying to bring your own person with you. And again, there's pros and cons to that. There's obviously the cost for that person's services, for tipping that person. They also need a place to be able to stay on the catamaran, so they need a cabin. Some of the catamarans have got smaller cabins, what they call the forepeak, or the very front of the ship. They're not comfortable cabins. You usually have to get through those through an external hatch on the top of the ship. I'll show some pictures of that, what I'm talking about, while I'm discussing here verbally. But you'll see some images that show what that looks like here. I'll pull those up and clip those into the video. So, but that is potentially, if you had all 4 normal cabins in the catamaran rented or used by everybody, by your guests, then a person could come in and perhaps stay in one of those forepeak cabins. They may charge a little bit extra for that, but like I said, it's not the most comfortable cabin on the ship by far. But that is an option. Like I said, usually when they do that, they want to do the provisioning for you so that they can plan out the meals and everything. For the British Virgin Islands, I will say that there are restaurants on nearly every island. And we'll talk through real quickly about the British Virgin Islands, the island set up geographically. You've got Tortola in the center, and then around that, the perimeter of Tortola, there's several islands to go and visit. At nearly every one of those islands, there are very nice restaurants to have, at the very least, lunch and dinner. Some of the restaurants and resorts will serve breakfast too. But if you're going to be on the ship, predominantly what you're going to be doing is probably eating breakfasts on the ship, maybe potentially a lunch here and there. If you go to a more deserted island to just spend the day on a beach or do some snorkeling, you may have lunch on the ship, but most likely all the places where you're going to be anchoring that are safe for the evening to anchor for overnight are going to have restaurants there as well. So just depends on what you all decide to do or what we all decide to do as a group going on this trip. My recommendation would be to plan for breakfast and an occasional lunch, and then have most of our dinners off the boat. So we are going to definitely need to do some food provisioning. There'll be some fees for what's called mooring. Basically, when the catamaran comes into a place and it's time to, you don't pull the boat into a dock every day. You might, as a matter of fact, you may never pull the boat into a dock except when you leave and when you bring it back to the marina to pick it up and to drop it off. Most people certainly do not do any docking other than picking it up and dropping it off. Most of what is done is pulling into a bay and then either anchoring or picking up what's called a mooring ball, which is a chain and a floating ball sitting on the surface that are anchored to a solid, like a concrete block or some large rock or something at the bottom. That keeps that boat from moving around, and then you just tie your boat off to that chain and that ball for the evening. The same thing as anchoring, but the pro to that is that you're then not disturbing all the surrounding area with your anchor, which is good for turtles, which eat a lot of the seagrass that's growing on those seabeds. And so when you've got your anchor out, you can potentially kill some of that seagrass and then disturb the turtle's food. So they prefer you to moor whenever you can in the Caribbean, specifically the British Virgin Islands has got a lot of mooring balls set up, and for the season that we're going, there should be plenty available for us to use. So that's probably what we've been doing. But your boat stays out, the catamaran would stay out in the bay, and then you would get on a smaller dinghy to get on and off the boat, take that either to shore or to a little dock, a little dinghy dock, where you could get off and get to a restaurant or to go do whatever activity you're doing for the day. Or you can just pull your dinghy straight up onto the beach and just get off that way. So we'll do more videos and talk about that at a later point in time. But that's typically what it looks like for getting on and off the ship. There are a couple really nice resorts in the Caribbean. There's one at Oil Nut Bay, there's Leverick Bay, there's Marina Key, and a few others where you could actually, they're very nice resorts where you could actually bring the boat into what they call a slip, which is a dock, and spend the night there if you wanted to use the facilities or the restaurants there. So that's an option, but there's obviously cost associated with that. That's not free. You got to pay for the slip itself, the boat dockage, excuse me, to be able to come in for the night. Could be $100 to $200 depending on the size of the ship you've got. And then there could be additional fees, obviously, for the restaurants or for the spas or whatever else you want to use for the night. That's an option. So just know that there are some fees with that. There's also some marine parks. The Bass in the British Virgin Islands is a fantastic spot to go. Highly recommended on just about every itinerary. It's one of the highlights of the British Virgin Islands. There's about, I think, a $15 per person fee to visit that park for the day. So things like that. Obviously, on top of that, it comes into, you've got your airline fees. For the month of May, what I am seeing right now in July of 2024, I'm looking at price points from Texas to the British Virgin Islands. There's two airports in the Virgin Islands that we could fly into. One would be in the U.S. Virgin Islands in Charlotte-Amalie. And St. Thomas. There's a U.S. airport there that we could fly into, and then from there you would take a ferry over to Tortola, which is where all the boats are stationed, where all the marinas are, or you could fly directly into the British Virgin Islands into the island of Tortola. So those are two options. The plus with flying into Tortola is that you're then not having to worry about ferry and transfers and things of that nature. You're getting your customs done right there at the airport. If you fly into the U.S. Virgin Islands, you don't have to mess with passports and stuff at the airport, but you do have to then, once you take the ferry, the boat over to Tortola, you then have to go through customs there at Tortola. So that just kind of gives you an idea of some of the pros and cons, or some of the logistics involved with that. I would also recommend people consider flying in maybe not the day of the charter. So when you pick the boat up, it's usually around noon, could be as late as 5 o'clock. There's briefings to go through. They want to make sure that the captain is familiar with the boat, is oriented to the boat and knows all the features of it, knows how to turn things on, knows how to turn things off, where all the safety gear is, that sort of stuff. So, and then they also want to have a briefing of all the islands that you plan to visit to make sure that you know where you can and where you can't take the boat. Where the reefs are, those sort of things. So there's a couple of briefings that you have to go through. I would probably give an orientation. Any good captain, I think, should give an orientation, or good skipper should give an orientation to their all their passengers about the safety of the boat and how to be safe on the boat. So that would also be something that would be important to do before we depart. So my point is, saying all of that, is that it's a good idea to consider flying into the island the day before, spending the night in a hotel, or you can also do a sleeper board on the boat, where the boat just stays docked at the marina and doesn't actually leave. And then you've got the next day to really get prepared and all set up before you actually sail out with the boat to all the islands. So do consider that. Also not a bad idea to maybe consider, as opposed to trying to bring the boat back in the morning and then rush right over to get on a flight, might not be a bad idea to spend an extra day or two in a hotel and relax before you need to head back as well. Also brings me to another point, which is do consider for this sort of vacation, sailing, whether or not you are prone to motion sickness or not. If you are highly sensitive to motion sickness, a sailing vacation probably is not the right thing for you. If you've experienced motion sickness in the past, there are things that you can do, moderately. There are things that you can do to help yourself in terms of Dramamine or ginger, some other things, or just, making sure that you're positioning yourself until your ears and your eyes reach equilibrium with one another. Because that's usually what the problem is that visually you're seeing one thing and your ears are telling you a different set of information in terms of movement. So getting on top of the boat, being at the helm, seeing the horizon are all good ways to help your body adjust to being on the sea and that movement. But again, like I said, if you are someone who is extremely prone to motion sickness, if you are very prone to getting seasick driving in a car or riding in a car, then again, that may be a problem where you want to consider maybe not being on the water for 7 days consistently for vacation, especially when you're sleeping on the boat. It can be quite disturbing if you are prone to motion sickness. Okay, so going back to costs, flight costs, what I am seeing here in July of 2024 is that airline tickets should be around at a low $600 for perhaps a one-way stop, usually in Miami. $600 to $900 per person round trip. Usually that's with one stop in Miami from Texas. There are direct flights. I don't see a whole lot of cost difference between flying into U.S. Virgin Islands versus British Virgin Islands. So again, I think just for simplicity's sake, my recommendation would be to fly straight into the British Virgin Islands, into Tortola. But if you wanted to go and fly into Charlotte Amalie in the U.S. Virgin Islands on St. Thomas, you could do that as well. But I don't see a whole lot of cost in terms of airline tickets. Airline tickets being something that is not consistent. So depending on the time of year that you're buying the ticket, prices can go up and down for the time period. So again, trying to find when the airline costs are at their best. You can set a tracker onto Google, try and figure out when, if we're going to fly on these dates, when do the airline tickets drop to their lowest. If you extend the vacation out a little bit longer, if you make it just 7 days, they tend to charge a little more. If your vacation is, say, 10 or 11 days, you may be able to find a little bit better deal as well. And again, also it gives you a little bit more flexibility, perhaps on flying in or flying out on a non-typical, non-high volume day for them. So the airline tickets could drop down a little bit there. But like I said, plan on maybe an average of about $700 per person per ticket. That might be a little bit on the low side, but that would give you a good ballpark to shoot for budget-wise. So that just talks through some general costs. Obviously, there would be fuel costs on the boat that we would all have to chip in for at the end. Like I said, not docking fees, but mooring fees. The anchoring is free, but picking up a mooring ball has got like a a $20 or $30 per night charge on it. It's not huge, and it's usually something everybody can chip into. And matter of fact, they've got a system now that lets you reserve mooring balls online every morning, and then so you can pay for that with a credit card, and then you can all settle up later. So I think that's the general idea of some costs, airline fees, boat costs, obviously, restaurants and souvenirs and whatever else you want to do is going to be completely up to you. There are some activities. Let's talk about some of the things that could be done just real briefly. If we just chose to go up to one of the islands in Anegada, which is to the north, a relatively flat island, but a larger island in terms of landmass, just in terms of raw area. And so in order to get to the beaches, there's no really good, you can't just go rent a car. What they do have available for rent is what they call mokes, which are like little small Jeeps, and some mopeds. So you could rent a moped and a Jeep. If you want to go anywhere on that island and see any of the beaches, that's the best way to do that. So there'd be some fees associated with that. Other things that could be done would be scuba diving trips, snorkeling trips. We'll be able to do that straight from the catamaran. So unless there's a specific place that you wanted to go see, which we couldn't get to for whatever reason on the catamaran, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of that. That would be something to consider. Scuba trips, obviously, we would need to coordinate that with a dive company, and there'd be extra costs associated with that. There can be some fishing done from the catamaran. We could even go so far as to perhaps drop some people off for a day at a beach who don't want to go fishing, and then we could take the catamaran out to a location where we could do some deep sea fishing for the day, and then bring it back. It's not obviously set up as a fishing boat, but that doesn't mean it can't be used in that way. So if I've got some people on the boat who are really into deep sea fishing, you could either do the option of hiring a guide to take us out, or we could go take off on the catamaran one afternoon and go do that on our own. So there's some options there, just depending on what you want to spend and what your expectations are for that. There are some places where, as we're sailing in between islands, you can do some trolling and try and pick up some fish that way. A lot of people do that as well. So some thoughts there. But those are obviously extraneous costs that would just come up depending on what sort of vacation we decide we want to do. So the last thing to talk about is just what does a trip on a catamaran look like? I think I've covered the costs pretty well. So just to recap real quick, $2,000 to $2,500 per couple for the week for the boat. $700 round trip tickets per person on a airline to get to the BVI. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. Plan on probably. Well, food costs are hard to nail down because there's some really big variables there, right? Probably just to provision the boat, plan on $300-400 per couple, I guess, would be a good range, probably. I'm probably pulling that number out of my head more than anything else, but I mean that would let us buy, for the week, eggs, and we're going to need a lot of drinking water, and just whatever else we want to provision the boat with in terms of eating for the week. On top of that, there would be restaurants and things and other activities that would totally be at your discretion and would not be part of shared costs, obviously. So that probably gives you a fair idea, just a quick recap of the costs. Okay, moving into what does a week on the catamaran look like. So a catamaran, and again, this is a part of the video where I'll throw up some images as I'm talking. It is a twin hull vessel. So you've got on each side basically a pontoon that sticks into the water called the hull. On those hulls, on the front and the back of each hull is a cabin. A twin bed cabin is a standard configuration. In between those twin hulls is our bathrooms. On a 45 to a 50-foot boat, each bathroom has got a toilet, a sink, and a separated shower. So we call that a dry head configuration, which means that you can stand in the shower completely separated from the sink and the shower area. On a smaller boat, they may have what's called a wet head. And if you get into a larger boat that's got more than 4 cabins, which some of the 50-footers and plus do 5 and 6 cabin configurations, and in order to fit more cabins on, they have to make the bathroom smaller. So you get into what is called wet head configuration, which just means you've only got one standing area in front of the sink, in front of the toilet, and therefore your shower head is right there next to it. So you stand basically in front of the sink, in front of the toilet, and you shower yourself off with a handheld shower wand. So that potentially, you want all your toilet paper, your toiletries and other things to be put in the cabinetry so they don't get soaked while you're doing that, because you're going to get that whole shower wet. So it's dry head versus wet head as the two bathroom configurations. They call the bathrooms the head. Specifically, the head refers to the toilet, but they call the whole bathroom the head. So anyway, so with most of the boats we're going to be looking at in a typical 4-cabin configuration, with a boat of 45 foot or above, you're looking at 4 double large cabins along with 4 dry heads bathroom configurations. So separated showers. So also most of these boats that we're talking about that are 4 years or newer are going to have generators on board, which will run air conditioning units. So we could have air conditioning running in the evening. We can charge cell phones and batteries and iPads and things of that nature off 110 voltage while the generator's running. And then also most of them have got water makers on board as well, which means that they can take seawater and they can convert it into fresh water. Not particularly fast, but if you let it run over a while, you can refill the water tank. So which means not so much drinking water, but it means that you get a fresh rinse when you come out of the sea at the back of the ship. You want to rinse yourself off with fresh water, you can do that. You want to take a shower with fresh water, you can do that. And because you've got a water maker on the ship, you have more or less an unlimited supply of water. Still want to practice basic water conservation on a ship. You don't just sit there and let the water run in the shower and go through all 200 gallons that are on the ship in one go. What you practice on a ship is what they call Navy showering, which means that you rinse yourself off, you wet yourself down, you soap up, you do the shampoo, and then you turn the water off to do that, and then you turn the water back on to rinse all that off. So that's the type of showering that we're talking about, just so that you're not sitting there and letting the water run and go down the drain consistently. You just go through a lot of water that way really quickly. But obviously with a water maker, you'd have a chance to refill those water tanks without having to pull into a dock and do it manually. So those are really nice features, really nice conveniences to have on a boat. And they are standard amenities on most of the boats that we'd be looking at. I don't think I'd consider any boat that didn't have at least those 3 main features on it. And that's within the price points of what we're talking about. So that's in either side of the hulls. And then the catamaran has a platform that sits above the water, connecting those 2 hulls together. In the catamaran, the advantage of it over a monohull or a typical sailboat, where you've got a single hull and then you're inhabiting the lower deck and the upper deck for your kitchen, your dining space, and then what you would consider the sitting space as well, where the bench is or the cockpit. The kitchen, the galley, the dining area, the inside spaces, those are spread out on that platform on a catamaran. Now there's an advantage to that. You get a lot more square footage to share in terms of sailing for the week, spending that week on that boat. There's a lot more space to spread out to. When you've got 8 people on the boat, that makes it a lot more comfortable space to inhabit for a week. And with that, there's a lot more spaces that you could go. So usually there's an interior salon or dining space with table with a sofa. There's an exterior space. There's usually benches. Some of the ships are going to have fly bridges. So up on top of the roof of the boat, there will be another inhabitable sitting space, potentially with benches and tables. There'll be a place up front of the boat that has got a place to sit and enjoy the view while the boat is underway. Some of the boats will have doors that will let you go from the interior cabins, from the interior salon, straight up to that front part of the boat. Some of them will not have that, which means you'll have to walk around the sides to get to those front sitting spaces. Most catamarans have got at the front some sort of trampoline or mesh that you can sit in, either when the boat is under sail or when the boat is at anchor, to enjoy just relaxing. It's kind of a built-in hammock to a large degree. Great spaces to inhabit and to sit at while the boat is underway. They're just you get a little bit of ocean spray on a relatively calm day, and it's just a fun spot to be. And if you're lucky, you may even get a chance to glimpse some dolphins at the front of the ship. The kitchen on a catamaran is called the galley. They are going to be small, efficient spaces, but they still are going to have a gas cooktop. A lot of them have got ovens, some have microwaves, and then you'll have a sink as well. You're not going to have a dishwasher. You're going to have to wash the dishes by hand, more than likely on most of these. They all have refrigerators and freezers. Some have got extra secondary freezing space or refrigerators, and a few of them actually have full-size residential full-height refrigerators and freezers on one particular boat that I know of at least. There's going to be 4 major brands of boats that will be available for rent in the British Virgin Islands: Lagoon, Leopard, Bali, and then Fontainebleau are the 4 major manufacturers that most of the charter companies are going to rent out. And I'll do another video where I go through the pros and cons of all 4 of those different boats. They each have their pros and cons, even though the basic layout is going to be that 4-cabin configuration. Now, when I say 4-cabin configuration, most of those boats are still going to have the four peak cabin in there, but again, that's not a space we want to consider somebody actually sleeping in, unless we decide we wanted to have either a hostess or a chef on the boat with us. Typical itinerary for a day would be to sail into, wake up, have breakfast on the boat, perhaps do some swimming, and then we pull up anchor, we release the mooring ball, and then we sail to the next island. Most of the islands are anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, maybe 2 hours at the very most. Sail between them, so you're getting to the next island relatively quickly, and then from there you pick up a mooring ball or you set your anchor, and then you're going and doing activities for that day, having lunch either on the island or on the boat, going snorkeling again, going swimming, going to the beach, doing a hike, whatever it is that you've got planned for that day at that island. And then depending on whether or not that is an evening mooring spot, there's some places where you would go where maybe there's a special activity to do in terms of snorkeling, or a beach that maybe is deserted, and you want to just hang out on a private beach for the day, where it's only a bay that's still is not protected enough for a full overnight anchoring. So you would anchor there just for the afternoon to do the activity, and then you would pull the boat out again and go to an overnight anchoring spot on a more protected bay. But a lot of the bays that we would pull into or want to do an activity are protected bays as well. So some of the time we may be pulling into a bay just for an afternoon. Some of the times we may be pulling into a bay and staying there overnight, and then the process repeats. And then usually, we do whatever the afternoon activity is, either as individuals or a group, and then we come back to the boat, freshen up, maybe go for a swim, maybe have some drinks if that's what we're into, and then we go out for dinner after that. So, that's really going to come down to just what we want to do as a group, what sort of activities are in. The nice thing about the British Virgin Islands is there are activities that just allow a wide range of vacations depending on what you want, whether you want to hang out at a beach bar, whether you want to just be on a private beach by yourself, whether you want to do snorkeling or scuba diving, whether you want to do fishing. There's hiking to do. It's just a wide range of things, plus just the soaking in the just general beautiful atmosphere of being on a pristine Caribbean island as well. So it makes for a really fantastic, really relaxing vacation. It's a spot where, again, you're on a boat now, you're sharing that boat with 8 other people, but there's the opportunity for somebody to take the dinghy out and go off and separate at times when you need to. If you want a little bit of privacy, or somebody wants to go have a private dinner and get away from the group for a night, certainly that's an option to do. Or we could all, spend the whole 7 days with each other and all go see everything together. Again, there's a lot. We can break this up however you want to, just depending on the group dynamics. Like I said, we're going to be shooting for May of 2025. I think that kind of gives you an overview of kind of what the vacation would look like. I know we're over 40 minutes on this recording, but those are the 3 points I wanted to hit. I may do some follow-up videos where I go into more depth and more information on some of these things, but I think that gives a good primer. I do want, for people who are interested in my trip in particular, to spend an evening or two where we get together and have dinner and see what the group dynamics are like with everybody, and have a chance to talk through who's really ready to make a commitment to doing a May trip in 2025, and also for you all to get to know each other too as crew on this ship. So that's everything I think I want to say for now. Thank you for watching this video. Be looking for an invitation to go to dinner with me and Angela soon, so we can just further hash some of this out. And I hope you enjoyed this. Take care.